to introduce herself.
Thanks, Caroline. Okay, moment of truth. Share my screen. Bear with me. Can you confirm you can just see the slides? Perfect. So yeah, hi everyone. Good evening. So my name is Alex or Alexandra Davenport. I'm an artist and I'm actually based in Birmingham, which has been quite a nice treat. So not far away from university. Just a quick introduction to my practice. So my practice is sort of heavily kind of informed by research. And in general, my practice explores a relationship between the body, knowledge, and representation. I have a background in dance, and that heavily informs the work I make as well. So I work a lot with performance, as well as choreography, photography, moving image, but also image and text. I like to think that I'm sort of I have a photography background, so I'm sort of trying to use these other mediums to rethink conventional approaches to image making and thinking more broadly about what an image can be. That's just very unhelpfully moved on to the next slide. There we go. Over the last 4 or 5 years, my work has been increasingly working at the intersection of art and science, which I was very excited when this residency came up, and having the opportunity to work on a live research project has been a really kind of enriching experience for my project, for my practice. The project I was working on in particular, which I'll talk about more shortly, I was particularly interested in because I've had kind of a longer term fascination with the brain in relationship to the body and so on. So yeah, it's been a really amazing experience. Now it's time for that slide. So a little bit about the project that I was involved in. So in my project, the team were training different artificial intelligence, so AI neural networks, to try and get those to perform a working memory task. The idea being that they could study this in AI, so then eventually this will allow them to study active forgetting in human brains. So not just someone kind of forgetting something, but kind of learning that, that very kind of active wanting to forget something. I guess the need for this project was that traditional forms of imaging, such as MRI, are quite limited, and you can't trace kind of individual neuronal activity. And this is where the AI comes in, the idea being you can train the code and you can see exactly what's happening at every kind of action. So the quote that's on screen, what happens in that moment, is actually a quote that stuck with me from our first research incubator workshops. And the full thing was, what happens in that moment when you're told you can forget? And that really stuck with me. And it's become the kind of title for my project. So to talk a little bit about what I've been working on. So I've been working on a book which kind of loosely interweaves text, research, photography, and also found imagery. And I guess what I was trying to do with this project is reflect the very process kind of based nature of it, because the project was in very much its early stages. They were still kind of working out what models to use, what architectures and so on. Doing a lot of coding as an artist, that was a kind of a challenge. How can I sort of interpret that into a project? And I became really interested as well in the relationship between kind of human and machine learning in particular. So the book's split into different chapters to reflect different phases of the project, which includes 2 different chapters on the 2 models that the team developed. So one that's called the forgetting model and the other is the working memory model. So this is another flat lay of the book. Scaffolding is also something that came up in the first meeting, because working memory, which this project is kind of based around, was described to me by the lead researcher as the ability to remember and manipulate information that is no longer available in the environment. It provides a flexible mental workspace that scaffolds most higher mental functions. So this has really stuck with me also, and I've used this as a sort of visual metaphor throughout the project. This is a kind of flat lay from the forgetting model chapter. So one of the kind of AI models that was developed was based on kind of existing research. So they kind of developed that code further. And in this chapter, I've kind of recreated that experiment using the kind of images you can see, the kind of little kind of squares on screen, as well as using transcripts from conversations I had with the team, alongside my interpretation of the code as well. And the code's something that has stood out to me throughout the project too. And just coming to this kind of last slide of mine then. So I mentioned about the code. One thing that I noticed when working with one of the research fellows was that they use these kind of coding comments throughout the code to kind of wayfind or find their way through it, but also to signify to other people who come in what different parts of the code do. So I've been using these in the book as visual prompts, and there was something very gestural about them to me as well, things like forward pass and backwards and optimize. So I've kind of been pairing these with images from sports training manuals. And again, I've been trying to look at this relationship between, the kind of training that's required to commit a movement to muscle memory versus the training that's required to develop a kind of an AI model as well. And that's me, just over 5 minutes, so I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much, Alex. And obviously you'll have the chance to ask Alex questions in a bit, but I'm now going to invite Dan to introduce himself and his project. Over to you, Dan.
Thanks, Caroline. I'll try to be quick. So hi, everyone. I'm an artist, curator, writer and filmmaker based in Birmingham, born in Birmingham. My background is in science and from the 90s, and from 2005, I started creating art alongside 25-year wellbeing career for LGBTQ plus people and communities. So my creative practice explores how we communicate and connect with one another, driven by an internal exploration of my own emotional and physical boundaries in relation to my identity and my lifelong invisible health condition. I always start a project off with informal conversation, initial drawings, mark making and creative writing. The title of the research project was a mathematical method for connecting people living with depression to the right treatment. So basically, the researchers are comparing functional MRI data from a set of patients took standard antidepressant medication with those using psilocybin, which is a naturally occurring psychedelic component found in magic mushrooms. So essentially, it's about choice the project is. So the aim is to explore whether we can predict better which depression treatments are more effective, thereby offering patients greater choice in the treatment alongside talker therapies and art therapies. So kind of a better relationship with, I guess, with the GP and the patients in the future. So I began this project in the usual way, engaging in informal conversations with my partner, my mother, looking at family photographs while reflecting both on my present and my past. But this led me to revisit the year 1989, a period marked by significant personal trauma, the sudden loss of a sibling, and the challenges coming to terms with my sexuality and the anxiety and depression surrounding this, and the shame and the stigma. So through the research, I call this situational depression and anxiety in response to grief and sexuality, the silence of secrecy, the judgment of the self and from the culture and society, in relation to shame and fear of rejection. For the project, I created various drawings, digital and analog, and developed and facilitated creative drawing workshops for participants who have lived experience of depression and anxiety, who either been on medication or are still on medication. The workshop was titled Creativity as Self-Care. During this residency, I've also attended 2 self-compassion workshops, formed a spoken word piece for 40 people, and a creative writing session for the Open Minds project, which is now called the Surreen Collective, which is a Punjabi, South Asian queer wellbeing community. So I guess by that I'm saying it's given me a bit more confidence to maybe speak out about kind of how I feel, about my kind of trauma, and realizing that unpacking trauma doesn't have to be from a negative point of view. The residency got me back into researching and reading again and giving me the confidence afforded to kind of think through my practice. So I guess the whole project was really valuable in terms of I did it from my own lived experience, but also from a lens from other people. So what I want to do is read out a spoken word piece that I wrote. There's a trigger warning of grief. So I'll just give a 15-second pause. When I read it, because I'm lacking confidence, I'm going to just turn my camera off just for the reading. And here we go. It's called 1989. So this piece I've also kind of done as a drawing piece that you'll see at the exhibition next month. And here we go. First there was silence, and then I hear the sharp sound of my dad crying, piercing through my ears. Never heard him cry before, made no sense. I begin to float through my bedroom door and past my dad, blaming and othering with his superstition and his ill-tasting ammunition, the splatter of words that can hurt the most. I'm floating towards the epicenter of pain to my sister screaming on repeat, the mid-beat of the distant screams of his name in Punjabi, and what will remain of what we can no longer see, fearful of what is to come. I gently fly into my mum's bedroom, hover around in silence, and witness true grief for the first time. A silent witness, words unspoken, and finally, I gently land and fall beside her in disbelief and give her the tightest hug, reassuring her of my theory of everlasting life for relief. A release of cold air and refreshing air inside, and for a moment she stops shaking and crying and starts to wipe away my tears, our bodies both momentarily in rhythm to the vibration of the deafening silence before the tsunami of the next wave nears, the flood of fears and tear erupting and climbing, and my inner silence forever instilled and taking a firm place inside and hiding. First there was silence. And that's me. I'll come back on the screen.
Thank you so much, Dan, and thank you for sharing that with us. I'm going to invite Christie to introduce himself and their work.
Checking I'm not on mute. Hi, everyone. I'm going to share some slides to go through my work, if that's okay. Is this visible to everyone? Okay, great. Okay, so my output of this residency has been a series of textile works. I was working with a team that was looking at methods of potentially predicting psychosis and more accurately predicting what type of psychosis people might have based on fMRI data, surveys, and other biomarkers. The principal output of my project has been a series of three sculptural works, all of which form a perfect square from above. However, in their full 3D volume, have this more distorted topography. I was interested in this idea of like orthogonal space and the perfect grid, and then the more organic structures of the brain. This is the sculptures up close. Each one is on a wooden frame, which gets its initial topography and then is sculpted through fabric, a novel fabric method, which I'll discuss further, but also using various admixtures to give it a more solid form than the delicateness of fabric. Each volume is working with and responding to the data set that my team were working with. I found the most interesting moment of exchange for this project was that we are from very different worlds. Even within the team, it's different worlds, people with computer science backgrounds, with psychiatry backgrounds. But this kind of ability to use, interpret, and manipulate in a non-negative sense data for different purposes. So one thing that I was using principally for this project was a compilation of different psychosis studies. And so this is a database which takes the work of over 120 studies and 2,685 individual patients and superimposes them together to create clusters of where brain activity is most commonly seen in different patients with psychosis in different studies. From this, then, I identified this one cluster that was in the prefrontal cortex, which is a key element of the brain for psychosis. I then, using 3D modeling software, took different sections or surveys, if you like, of this individual cluster to create the different forms of the sculpture. And so they're sort of operating at a scale of something like roughly around 400 times larger in real life, I believe. And so they kind of blow up the brain from this thing which we all have to something which is a landscape which is in some ways abstract, but also then gives a more material reality to what is also abstracted, which is data sets. Just as the data that I was working from is a layered composition, like I said, 2,685 individual minds are superimposed to create that cluster. I wanted to work with materiality that has some sympathy with that process of layering. This is some stills from my process I used to create this, where I was working with organza fabric, which is a fabric I use in my practice a lot, and I generate a lot of waste. And I was trying to find a way to take this fabric waste and turn it into a new surface. So what you can see here is me with a big pile of scrap, and then layering it in between two layers of water-soluble material, which I then cross-stitched, as you can see on the right here. And then when you dissolve it in water, that top layer is gone, but the stitching remains, and it becomes a very strong material. And so it creates a sort of grid that has a similar sympathy to the source material of this kind of orthogonal space in the mind. But also, the material of organza has some interesting properties about silk fibers being used to restore neural networks, and is something that might in the future, and is outside the scope of this project, but might help with people with psychosis to restore certain neural pathways. So both in the material process, but also in the actual material properties, there's a relationship. And so the process and I'll be exhibiting them in a few weeks' time in the show, are these volumetric shapes of a volume that is kind of a place where it doesn't exist, but also is a solidarity space as well. I was very conscious when working with the topic of a brain that it's like a very individual thing, a very singular thing. And these are landscapes that are made of 2,685 minds. It's the number that I just always come back to. It sort of creates a landscape of solidarity rather than a landscape of individuality. And they have this nice translucency as well, which also talks to the opacity of the data being used. As a kind of way of trying to get my head around some of the complex material being discussed, because I'm not from a psychological background, I was trying to work through textiles in order to understand some of the ideas. This is a series that I also produced, where instead of trying to create these large landscapes, these are sort of at real brain scale. I have one piece with me here, and so it's roughly, or it's blurring out because Zoom is being clever, but it's roughly the scale of the actual human brain, and it's the different neural pathways, which is called the default mode network, which is one of many models that can be used to map the human brain, and was being used by the team. In a similar way that these are then embroidering and stitching together different elements of that same fabric, organza, to map out the different neural pathways. And you can just see these from above here, which will also be exhibited in the upcoming exhibition. And I believe that's me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dan. And the exhibition show that everybody's been mentioning so far, I was going to mention this at the end, but I might as well mention it now. That will be on the 7th of March at Centrala for Digbeth First Friday. So we do invite you to come in and see all these works in person then. But last but definitely not least, I move over to invite Charlotte to talk about her work and project.
Thank you. Hello everyone. So this is going to take a lot of sharing because I've got different things to share, but I will do my best. So I hope it comes through okay. Right. So so my name's Charlotte Dunn. I'm going to display. A lot of my work involves the integration of art and science. This is my third SMQB project. I work a lot with people with lived experiences. I've worked with Crohn's and Colitis UK. I've done projects with Mind. I've worked with the STEM team at University of Wolverhampton. A lot of my work involves hidden illnesses, working with patients, and this project was particularly highlighted to me because I have epilepsy and I'd never done a project about epilepsy before. So it was really something that was very close to home for me. And when it came about, I sort of felt like I could really, it could be something I could put my own lived experience into as well. So this is one of the slides that Leandro put together, but this is just to explain a little bit about the project. So the team were basically working on the forecasting of seizures. So for anyone who doesn't know epilepsy very well, epilepsy comes about, so seizures come about by triggers, basically. Those triggers are limitless, really, but sometimes it can be things such as disrupted sleep, stress and anxiety, body cycles, so something called your circadian rhythm. It can be contributed to your temperature. So There are many factors that a person can then you can put together, and it can then help forecast a seizure or if a seizure is going to take place. And the team are basically working on data from those triggers that will then be put into a type of wearable device. So whether that is a watch or a phone app, that will then help forecast seizures for someone who's suffering from epilepsy. This is really, really close to home for me. The fact that something can help you forecast whether you're going to have a seizure, it forecasts someone's day. Basically, if you have epilepsy, that idea that someone can tell you or give you a percentage of if a seizure is going to take place, it will completely dictate your day and what you do and how you take your medication. And I was trying to think about, when I started the project, what dictates everyone's day. So I'm epileptic, but what dictates everyone's day? And obviously, it's the weather. We look outside, we watch the weather, we see if it's raining, and the weather dictates what we do. You know, we don't make plans to go and have a picnic if it's raining. And that idea of forecast also came up a lot in the meetings I had with the team. So I started looking into weather forecasting, and I looked at what meteorologists actually do, because I wasn't aware of how weather forecasts come about. So I looked at meteorologists who, this is just a description on Google of what meteorologists actually do who forecast our weather, that they look at a quantity of observational data, including satellite imagery, radar data, air condition, wind profiler, and all of that comes together to then give us our weather forecast for the day. And that actual process is very, very similar to what Leandro and the team were doing. So it showed that similarity again between the weather forecasting and the forecasting of the seizures. So this led me to bring these two together, and how I could actually pick up on something that everybody every day dictates our lives, but how someone for epilepsy, these triggers do dictate their life, the seizures do dictate your life. So I began doing some sketches on SketchUp of weather forecasts, so maps. I wanted them to be a bit distorted, so I'd get some images of the weather forecast over America, over Ireland, and I start drawing over the colours to just see what kind of happened, really. Usually I have to say I am not a video artist in any way, shape or form. I'm very, very much call myself a drawing installation artist, but I'm very much drawing, so this is where I started. But as I was drawing them, I thought it would be great if these actually moved and I could begin to start to make my own weather forecasts. So I juxtaposed some of the weather forecasts over the map of a brain to sort of bring in the epilepsy element of it. And then that gave me the idea of actually creating some weather forecasts that are distorted in the way that they are actually forecasting epileptic seizures. So I went about that. So I downloaded and took some scripts from some weather forecasts from the BBC. And I actually started putting in and dropping in the words in those forecasts that are the triggers. So you can see at the one on the top, now let's see what your epilepsy is like today. That would say, now let's see what the weather is like today. You have been very tired and sleepy, so there's a chance of some small seizures. So that idea of this being a very, very friendly, light-hearted script, I'm actually dropping in seizure triggers here for someone who's epileptic, but it's making it light-hearted, because at the end of the day, this is someone's everyday life. This is my everyday life for someone with epilepsy, but we're making it light-hearted. I didn't want things to sound negative, because it's part of your life, but it's forecasting the seizures in exactly the same way as we would see the weather forecast. So I began myself. I went to use the green screens at Birmingham City University. I stood in front of them and did my own little weather forecast. I've never done anything like this before, so this was very, very out of my comfort zone. But yes, so I started reading out the weather forecasts and putting some animating the drawings that I'd done behind me and making some mock-ups of some weather forecasts. I liked the way it looked, but I didn't think I was naturally the person to be the presenter. And I'll go on about that in a minute. But I wasn't sure whether, because I'm epileptic and I know this is quite an abstract idea of comparing epilepsy to the weather. So I ran a focus group of 8 people who have epilepsy and showed them my mock videos, sort of kind of talked about the scripts of what I was saying as well, because certain people can take offense to like the words fit or and things like that. So I wanted to make sure the scripts that I was using and the animations that I was using did help people feel at home, as if you were watching the weather. So I showed them representations of the drawings, but they really liked the representation of the brain being in the animations. I personally never I know this sounds silly, but I don't link my epilepsy to the brain. I always linked it to how I felt. But a lot of these people did actually like the brain representation in the animations, so I added that in. They also wanted to know about the probability of the seizures happening in the script, so that was added in. And a lot of them didn't like the pink, but that was just the thing because it was quite a severe colour. So it was really nice talking to these people to get the other opinions of people who have experienced epilepsy in perhaps different scales to me, and also how they link it emotionally to parts of them, because that was really important in how I was making it, because I wanted this weather forecast to be something that they would see every day, and it will forecast their seizures, like what the research group are doing with their forecasts. So this led me to put a call out. So I work at Birmingham City University, and I put a call out to the media students at Birmingham City University about who would like to be my presenter for my forecasts. And I got these two fabulous Year 3 media students, Ethan on the left and Connor on the right, who actually is a radio presenter. They did an amazingly job when we went into the green screens, and I wrote them the scripts for the weather forecasts, and they recorded the weather forecasts with me. And I'm going to show you two of them now. I'll show you one of Ethan's, so I'll just stop sharing for a moment. I'll show you one of Ethan's and I'll show you one of Connor's, just to give you a little bit of an idea of the scale of it. So hopefully my sound will work. I'm just going to leave it on this, so ignore everything around it. But
welcome to the seizure forecast. Now, let's see what your epilepsy is like today. You have been very tired and sleepy, so there is a chance of some small seizures, so make sure you don't leave home without a friend. The temperature is around 36 degrees centigrade, so ensure that you take your medication. There may be a chance of seizures in the afternoon, with your temperature a bit higher at around 39 degrees. Tomorrow and towards the middle of the week, your circadian rhythm is great. So no seizures for you, but it is quite busy. So make sure you rest when you can. The later part of the day has the best forecast today, with no chance of seizure activity.
And then I'll just show you one more, just to... this one was Ethan. But there is 16 of these altogether, so when you do see them in the exhibition, they'll be back to back, and you can see a whole array of them because there's 16 different videos.
Good morning. We will now check the latest seizure forecast for today. Let's start with the forecast in the morning. We will experience a fine day today and you will be generally seizure free, but there may be a small chance of seizure activity in the afternoon due to some small changes in your circadian rhythm. Luckily, there will be a 0% chance of any grand mal seizures due to your consistent temperature and small amounts of alcohol intake, a great sign for sunny things to come. Your temperature will be around 37 degrees. It is advised you take your medication. And now back to the studio, and we will see you for your forecast tomorrow.
Okay. So, thank you, everyone. That's me.
Thank you so much, Charlotte, and thanks all the artists for giving us a little bit of a heads up on what will be on display in March. So I'm going to kick off with a couple of questions, but those of you watching, if you've got questions, now's the moment to sort of pop those into the Q&A section on Zoom, and we'll come to those after these initial kickoff questions. So this is really for all the artists. Perhaps you could tell us a little bit about what you found most challenging and most rewarding about the opportunity to work with scientists or researchers. And I think you've highlighted, some of you already, about how even within the teams, there's a mixture of scientists. They're not all coming from the same background. So how did you cope with that, and what were the sort of the barriers and the facilitators, or the positives or negatives of that?
I find just working with scientists fascinating because of the difference in the language that arises between you when you're just talking about the project. I mean, I think a few of us have said when you're talking and just words come out, like with me it was forecast, and you kind of instantly begin to relate what you know in the outside the science world to your project and to the science world, and also to try and understand the research as well. I think you do have to pick up on certain words and images and patterns and things that come about in the conversations with that. So I always find the communication, obviously we come from two totally different backgrounds, but the communication is obviously often the most interesting thing, because it's the words and the imagery and just general the conversations of things that come out when you're talking to each other, especially about describing about what the project's going to be or how it's going to evolve. So that for me always has been the kind of thing that comes about. And I think most rewarding, most different for this project for me, there was no visuals at all in this project, which was really, really, really challenging for someone who usually draws something or paints something or makes something. And I think that's why I turned to video. And I think there's a few of us on this resident as well who's turned to video, because there was no visuals. And again, so I had to pick up on the language even more, and that was a challenge for me. And especially making videos was a challenge for me. So yeah, personally, I just think the language is always really, really important when you're communicating with the teams as well.
Thank you, Charlotte. I think, yeah, you've highlighted actually that every time we have these rounds of seed corn projects and things, we never really quite know, how much imagery or how much data or what kind of data. Well, we do know because we kind of select the projects, but for the artists, it's kind of an unknown what you're going into to some degree. So previous projects you've been involved with have obviously involved much more sort of imagery and things, but on this particular round, not the case. Anybody else that wants to come in on that question, though?
Oh, sorry, Alex, you go.
Oh no, it's okay.
I was just going to say, like what Charlotte was saying about the language and the different ways of seeing is sort of the most, like your question is kind of what is most interesting and what is most difficult. And I think the interdisciplinarity, if that's a word, that it is the most interesting and the most difficult. Like that's the thing that I find is like such a rewarding process. I think maybe to elaborate on that is I think it also goes back to a visual thing, like what is the end point or the output. I think in different disciplines, like maybe I'm in some ways I guess using data as a method to then produce outputs, whereas maybe in the study side of the project, they may be producing data visuals to explain outputs. And I think it's interesting, like if we're working from shared data sets or shared resources, then how drastically different projects can come out of that. I think both are necessary because both are kind of explanative in different ways. Like you need to be able to explain data in a way which can then be repeatable or understandable for future publications or future studies. But also there is a key element with almost all these projects of buy-in about how do you communicate to a broader public and how do you engage with people. And that is the role of the Artemis project, but also it highlights the importance of the work the scientists are doing. So it's an interesting position that as an artist we're put into.
Thank you, Christie. Alex, did you want to say anything, or Dan?
Yeah, I was just gonna kind of speak also to what Charlotte said about the challenge of not having sort of visuals or something to directly sort of respond to in that way. I come from a photography background, so a lot of what I do is about the image, about the kind of visual aspect. And in my project, I kind of touched upon it, but I felt like it's all about the code. Like a lot of it was coding and discussing the code and looking at mathematical models. And I guess that's why I kind of started to lean into these kind of comments in the code and looking for like ways in which I could interpret those visually, or thinking about how they might be embodied. And I guess coming back to language as well. So I guess that's the route that I found in, but it took quite a while to find my way there. I think Christie, you touched on this as well. It's one of the challenges, but there's a lot of kind of complex things being talked about, which people from different disciplines and different backgrounds. So I think the first couple of months for me was trying to kind of make sense of. I knew a little bit about artificial intelligence, but not to the extent that it was in this project. I learned about lots of different AI architectures and also more about the brain. And I felt like I had to kind of not be an expert, but have a sort of a bit of an underpinning to then be able to kind of interpret what was happening through the kind of artwork. Yeah, so I think, yeah, one of the biggest challenges for me was also the lack of the visual things to respond to, but it was also one of the most rewarding things as well. I feel like, yeah, I found that so challenging that when I kind of felt like I kind of cracked it, and I was like, oh yeah, I found like a way to kind of, I found a way in, and then when I sort of did that, it felt very rewarding. And I think as well, watching that process of like a live research kind of project reminded me a lot of the creative process as well. It's like you go a little bit further forward and then it's like, oh no, that didn't work. And then you take a step back, it's this constant like dialogue. And also how other people can add to the process, and suggest things, and things come from different sources to kind of make this kind of rich tapestry of, kind of what's happening. But yeah, so that was my kind of rewarding and kind of challenging.
Do you think that helped sort of expand your own practice then, the fact that it sort of forced you into a position where you were not able to work with visuals as you might have done with previous projects?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I kind of saw a sneaky thing in that I can answer that properly later, the question in the chat. But there's something around like I obviously work with performance quite a lot and the body. And there was something to me that, yeah, like I think whenever I work with performance, I'm trying to think about what's the value in something becoming embodied in that way, and what's the reason for it being a performance. And I guess I lent into this kind of more kind of text heavy kind of format and book format, because of that kind of process and trying to bring together these different fragments or different strands of the project, which perhaps I couldn't really do in my kind of regular, how I do regularly in my practice. So yeah, I think it definitely did kind of force me, but in a good way. And think about my practice like very differently as well.
Thank you, Alex. Dan, did you want to say anything in response to that?
So I come from a maths and computing degree from back in the 90s, and I thought, oh, this will be interesting, but I found it completely overwhelming. I thought, what are they on about on the first day I met them? And then I tried thinking outside the box, and then I remembered some of my maths, and it was sort of helpful. But even then, I just thought these researchers have got just completely just amazing brains, and they're really talking about some really in-depth stuff. But we kept an internal blog where we could communicate. So I thought, is there a way I could disrupt any level of research or do something? So we kept a blog, and then Catherine and Sam and Maria were kind of responding to it. So we were having this communication kind of online, which was really helpful. But what I found rewarding was kind of, I've always run workshops, but developing workshops with a specific group of people around depression, which is kind of a lot of stigma in all communities, but especially my South Asian communities. And to get people recruited was difficult. We had 4 people in total, but the rewarding aspect was to just literally have a safe space curated together where people felt they trusted the process and they can learn more about the research. And through that process, through Maria, I learned, who one of the researchers, learned much more about what the research was about. And I felt the work was really about choice. And it wasn't so much about maybe coming from my own kind of unpacked trauma, but that kind of was a starting point. So went in it quite deep straight away. And then it became this thing which was a struggle, but then eventually chat with Catherine and Sam, and Sam attending the workshops and trying some drawing exercises out. It was really useful, but I thought I was losing the plot at one point because I didn't know what the researchers were on about. But eventually the blog helped, and we kind of interacted. We spoke, a telephone conversation, Zoom, and it became really exciting. So I like the way I kind of just picked a tiny point of the research and started to expand on it rather than respond to the research. I didn't think I wanted to graphically show what they were doing. I just wanted to respond to something that was just hovering in the kind of in the middle sort of thing.
Thank you, Dan. And actually, I didn't mention at the start, but all these residencies kick off with a 2-day research incubator where the teams and the artists are together for basically two whole days, and they have dinner and things in the evening as well. So it's quite an intense 2 days. And Dan, your reaction about, feeling a bit like, oh, mind blown by the end of day one, that is such a common reaction. I get that from pretty much all the artists that we've worked with over the past 5 years. That's a really common reaction for them to say, oh my gosh, by day one, I just felt like, how can I penetrate this project? How there's so much going on. But hopefully by the time sort of day 2 rolls around, they feel a bit more confident. They're asking more questions and things. And yeah, I just want to reflect on that as being a very common thing that I get kind of feedback on, but it seems to be part of the process. I wanted to ask actually Dan and Charlotte a question around the utility and the power, I suppose, of involving people with lived experience in the projects too. So that's obviously something that we encourage researchers at university to think about when they're developing their projects and delivering them. It's actually how they can work with end users that might be, people with lived experience or patients or members of society, depending on the nature of the project, obviously. And you both spoke about how you'd run workshops with people with lived experience. Could you talk a little bit more about the usefulness of that, both to your own work, but also potentially to the researchers that you were collaborating with?
You
go
want to go first, Charlotte, or?
No, you go first. That's fine.
Okay, so I guess Maria also led a workshop that I co-facilitated on, and I think the value of it was that just listening to other people connect and just have space to make work that was kind of like creativity, self-care, but not feel like they had to unpack how they're feeling or the experiences. But during the whole process, people shared certain stuff about how they felt isolated, how they felt judged, how they had difficult experiences at GP surgeries and through other counsellors and psychiatrists. So the thing there's a lot about things like stigma and judgment coming out. So a lot of this kind of leans into shame. Kind of Brené Brown talks about, shame being this silence and this secrecy and this judgment. And I think the chance that when people got together, slightly anxious the first half an hour until we said, let's create a safe space. And then they really enjoyed just being together and being kind of vulnerable and talking about stuff, and make sure safe space doesn't just exist within the room, it can exist kind of in the building. So we're at the Midlands Arts Centre. So for us, it's really interesting when we looked at kind of cognitive processes of the brain and stuff, and how people respond to certain responses. And it was really useful, the fact that people felt less isolated and they felt like they felt included and involved in the research as well, which was really, really good. And we had continued conversations after that. We created like a WhatsApp group, and I sent emails, I invited them to the showing of a experimental piece of work that I did. They also took part in creating a digital booklet, which I'll be showing at the exhibition. So they felt included, and I'm still in touch with them as well, which is really, really cool. And I think without the scope of the project, I think there needs to be more of that public engagement, I think, for the cross-section of people. So the people I work with were mainly gay, bi, trans, queer men of South Asian kind of heritage. So that's quite a specific group, but the feedback was great. I think the researchers really we did a feedback form, they got all the feedback, and that was really useful. That formed part of maybe a future funding bid as well, so it's quite useful, I think.
Thank you, Dan, and do invite them to the showcase as well.
They're invited already, so.
Mine. So I had a focus group of people who had epilepsy or have had epilepsy in their life, and I think there was about 10 of them altogether. And I showed them my initial video. I think I wanted to, as I say, I have epilepsy myself, and I have my own experience. Epilepsy is quite a it's a personal thing on your mental health. I've always thought it affects your mental health in different ways for everybody, and we all agreed on that in the group. But as I said, to me, the initial animations that I'd made, they didn't have the brain in at all, because although it happens in your brain, a lot of how epilepsy had made me feel over the time I had it, and the seizures made me feel, I hadn't always associated it with my brain. It had been the way I'd felt it, how it affected my personal life, it had how it affected my work, and because it had quite a big impact on me when I was younger. So I think I'd done that subconsciously. I hadn't put a brain in my drawings, but when I had spoken to the other group, some of them got that, others of them didn't, and I think it also depended on what background they came from as well. And I thought I might have been a bit too arty with it, because they were tuning into their brain and they blamed their brain for their epilepsy, and their brain was failing them, and it was all about their brain, and they were sort of blaming their brain. So it became more of an important symbol in the work that I created. So it was really useful in that way. And also, as I say, the words of the script. That was really good to speak to them about, because it was weird because there was a mixture of men and women in the group. Women weren't so bothered about when the seizures were going to take place. They just wanted to know if they were going to have one, or there might be an idea of have them. But then the men, weirdly, specifically wanted to know the exact percentage of when the seizures were going to take place. And Leandro, who was also in my research group, he found that quite interesting. They wanted an exact number of the percentage chance of a seizure taking place. So I know he found that quite interesting. There was such a scale of people, some people wanting to know exact things, some people not wanting to know exact things. And it was kind of mixing that up in the script for me. But obviously this project and what the research group are doing is so influential for people with epilepsy that we might be able to forecast seizures happening in a day. Everybody just wanted to know what Leandro was doing as well. So it was kind of like they got very, very interested in that. So it helped both of us in that way, because it was it's such an interesting project that it became our whole focus group. So it was good to know. But I think getting that different opinion, because epilepsy is obviously so different for everybody and everyone's experiences, it really dictated my work and the way the animations looked. And also it was just nice that they saw the relation between the weather and your seizures. They all sort of got that relation, and that was really nice to know.
Great to get that kind of positive feedback. And as you say, I think epilepsy is one of those conditions, isn't it, where I can't remember now, but there's so many different actual types of seizure, something which I wasn't even particularly aware of before I started with working with the SMQB about sort of 5 years ago. But yeah, people just assume that every seizure is sort of the same, but actually there's completely, loads and loads of different types of seizures, and people can have seizures every day. Some people might have them only every so often. So I think speaking to a variety of people can be really influential in kind of helping inform projects and things. Thank you both. I do want to ask you all a question about where you see the projects going next, but I think I might hold that question towards the end of the webinar, because I'm keen that we go to audience questions. You perhaps already answered a bit of this, Alex, but we do have a question from Ian. Hello, Ian, about why you chose the book format rather than a piece involving the body and movement, given your previous background. Are you happy to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's a really good question. I think I was asking myself that a lot throughout the project as well. I think it's probably important to kind of mention, when I do work with performance in my practice, it's weirdly not always the first thing that I sort of fall into. You'd think it was because of my background and things, but I often spend kind of months kind of sifting through research, imagery, trying to kind of piece together a sort of a narrative and what it is that I'm kind of trying to say, or how that might translate into a performance, I guess, and what that sort of language is. So I often work in sort of an intense research period, and then I often work with others with performance. So I go into like a movement research kind of phase, essentially. But that relies on me having something to take with me to be able to say, this is sort of, what the score is, the kind of choreography, this is what, I would like to make the work about. I guess, in the kind of relatively short period of the residency, it took me quite a while to sort of get to the point where I am now, where hopefully further down the line, I'm looking to develop a performance. Because I think I found a way into that in terms of the different kind of AI models that were being used and the kind of different properties and things they have. But yeah, I guess it was more from that, me starting in the very much the research phase of the project. But also I think to speak to something that I know you mentioned, the incubator sessions, Caroline, but I think one of the things I found most kind of rewarding as well, but interesting, was just the conversations with people, which is why actually from those first incubators I kind of took notes, but then I did some kind of audio recordings from other meetings and transcribed those and used that text throughout the kind of book, because I think we were constantly trying to work through and make sense. Like this kind of sense making was really interesting for me. You often see kind of outputs of projects of the final thing, but there was something about being involved in that process, which, as an artist felt very familiar and very kind of safe as well in a way. So I guess I wanted to use text quite heavily because that felt such an important, that dialogue felt so important, and it felt like the kind of, the basis of the project for me. But there is so these two models that they sort of have developed, essentially there is the plan for them to kind of bring them together and develop So they've got the forgetting model and they've got a working memory model. So the project came to sort of an end for SMQB before they had a chance to kind of further develop that, but that is sort of their kind of next steps. And I think for me as an artist, I'm looking to develop a performance in response to that, this sort of kind of working to forget performance, which will kind of, speak in conversation with the book as well.
Thank you, Alex. There's a comment, it's rather than a question, Christie, from Ian as well, just saying that he was really sort of impressed by your response to the research and your ability to sort of bring in ideas which are very artistically strong as well. So not so much a question, but if you want to turn that into a question, Ian, feel free to, but more a nice comment,
Well,
I think.
I did maybe like, is it a response, but something that I think Alex said as well about the way in which response is an interesting like word with this stuff, because like as much as we are part of a team, we were also being responsive. And I do like it might sound silly, but I do like the feeling of ignorance is like quite a nice feeling if you actually tap into it, like knowing that you don't know. Again, we all kind of know what AI, but none of us are like experts in this stuff. We're entering as like experts in other stuff and like having to learn, and then suddenly, like you latch onto certain things over other things. So I was really just transfixed by the available data sets, which is like so commonplace to the other members of the team because it's just what they use every day. They don't think about it. Whereas I'm like, whoa, you can get all these brains. That's cool. And I think it's almost like a childlike position you're put in, and that's very valuable. And it's like something that in creative process is something you should look for, because like that kind of plastic curiosity that you have to like be drawn to something immediately is something that as you get older in life you don't do as much, and creative practice is a space that you're able to maybe do that in a different way.
Lovely point. Thank you, Christie. Just to say, there are another two artists actually involved in this round of the Artists in Residency program, and they'll also be exhibiting their work on the 7th of March. They just unfortunately weren't able to join us this evening. But I will move on to Mel. Mel's question. Hi, Mel. So Mel herself is a previous artist in residence with SMQB, I think in our first round, so a few years back now, Mel. But great to have you here. And she just commented that she also had that experience of feeling like a bit mind blown in those initial talks with the researchers. So her question is, how did you navigate the information from different disciplines after those initial days, and how did it challenge your art practice? Anybody want to come into that? Come onto that question first.
I'm happy to. Oh.
You go.
Oh, it's only very quick. I was going to say that during the incubator day, Sam and Catherine were doing like these doodles. So I start animating those doodles and playing around with those doodles and making other work out of the work that was just a photograph. And that kind of led me on to kind of doing like more text-based approaches. And then we were talking about just like words and picking out words, and that got me to some spoken word sort of performances, which I've never really done before in front of a live audience. And I just thought I'll try that. So taking observations and things that are happening rather than actual research was quite interesting. Just collecting the conversations that are happening was quite a useful way of kind of seeing things, but it's kind of been ignorant of the actual research or the avoidance of it. So I think just getting to know the researchers was really a valuable part of this for myself anyway.
Thanks, Dan. Go ahead, Charlotte.
Yeah, I think for me, so this is my third SQMB project, but this is the first incubator I'd been to because of other things that have happened before. But I mean, I found this project very, very different because there were literally, as I said, no pictures. And as an artist, that boggled my mind. I remember even saying to Leandro, is there just nothing the data looks like what does it look like? And all he gave me was a zigzag. So I found this one a lot harder to kind of approach from a visual as a person who usually makes something it like makes a physical thing. It was really hard to kind of, so Google was my first best friend. I literally just sat on a computer and was Googling like the word forecast for ages, and obviously the most thing that came up was weather forecasts as well. And then I started to look into the science of the weather and how the weather worked, and I found that relation worked very, very closely. So I think it was just those initial sparks of the words, and then Googling as much as I can how those initial words that I noted down kind of could transform into something. Because yeah, it was very, very different to how I'd usually have mapped something out. Usually I'd have made some sketches, done some paintings, done some sculptures of something, but there was nothing for me to, other than draw zigzags on a page. I couldn't have done anything. But I think that's been really good for me, because it's really challenged my practice and not making that visual form. I'm still getting used to giving people links instead of giving them a physical thing, because I'm finding it really weird. But that initial thing that there was no images, I think it made me pick up and do the research into further the processes that Leandro and the team were doing, as well as the processes and how I could relate them to things that are happening outside in life as well. If that makes sense.
Thank you, Charlotte. Christie, Alex, do you want to say anything in response to that question about your developing your practice further, and the experience of, you know, navigating these different disciplines and things after that initial sort of 2 days of quite intense activity with the research team?
I think in terms of how it challenged my practice, I think there's always a fear as an artist, where especially if you're in a residency or you're responding to something that there's kind of an expectation, you know, that I've got to produce, I've got to make something, it's got to be good, and I think, you know, the longer I've kind of, you know, been an artist and spent time with that feeling, I've got more used to it, but it never sort of goes away. There's always this sense of, oh, am I going to find a way through this? Am I going to find a response? Am I going to be able to, yeah, kind of produce something meaningful? But I think, especially in this project, I've been able to sit with that a lot more. And I think that's really helped me to grow as an artist as well. I think having obviously the kind of, yeah, the openness of the researchers in the project, and they're kind of, yeah, they were very welcoming, and, you know, I was involved in all the meetings and I felt really part of the team. So I think that really helped with that sort of imposter syndrome thing as well. But there was definitely something in that that was, yeah, has been really great. And I can kind of sit here now and look back and be like, oh, you know, I did do it, and, you know, it kind of building that trust with myself as an artist, I guess. So yeah, that was the most rewarding thing, I think, for me.
Lovely to hear, Alex. And Chris,
just I think the thing as a structure, I enjoy the program structure that 2 days of intensity, and then, at least for me, the rest has been remote. And 6 months is a very interesting length of time. Like, it was nice and sunny when we started. It's not right now. Well, it is sunny actually, but it's freezing. And I think that way of sort of, I mean, the word is incubate, but then afterwards, like, kind of just out in the world and like figure out what happens. I think that's a very valuable way of like starting a project, and it's definitely like on other creative projects that I've been working on since. Just today, even I was thinking like, oh, I could really do with meeting all these team members in person. And I think that's where it comes from. Like, I do value like that intensity, and then followed by working in maybe a more individual or secluded way.
Thank you, Christie. I'll go to another audience question. So thank you for that question, Mel. So let me see. So there's 2 questions which I'm going to kind of roll into one, if that's okay. So Jamie has asked, what's been the most interesting part of the project for you? And Nita has asked, have you surprised yourselves? Did the project send you down a very different path of responding to your own projects in the future? So what was the most interesting part, and also, you know, what's perhaps surprised you most? And I think linking to the question that I was going to sort of ask you towards the end, you know, what are you thinking in terms of the future? Are you planning to continue some of this work in future, or is this is a project that you've done now, and actually it was a great experience potentially, but, you know, it's helped you move your practice, but you're moving on to a different project? Or is this something you want to explore further? I think hopefully, well, that's about 3 questions in one. Feel free to answer all or any.
Happy to go first. I would say that it's been quite transformative in terms of, I've always been a wellbeing worker, working in kind of like emotional wellbeing and mental health with people that are marginalized. But but when I explored, kind of revisited my own trauma, I realized that there's no care for me at the time when I was experiencing that trauma, and I think there's lots of isolation, lots of struggle for many years. And I realized that through that, I realized that my practice is all about communication and conversation, listening to people. And it's transformed in the sense that I've been on 2 compassion workshops. I've linked up with Angela Bandari, who's a part of Love Compassion. I'm doing a few courses around it. I've got a few workshop ideas lined up. And I'm still engaged with the participants that got involved. And also I'm going to probably apply for some funding around this to develop, I guess, more time to kind of develop a research and practice around kind of like, I guess, kind of creative therapies a little bit. So for me, it's been quite transformative. And I haven't, as I said, I haven't done spoken word stuff before. And that's become this thing where it makes me anxious, but actually, you know, it allows me to take risk away from things like live art performance or video work or text-based work. So I'm conflicted slightly because sometimes the private and the public doesn't work for me in terms of what is personal, what is not said and what's said. So I'm just excited about the networks I've made and all the people I've met during the journey beyond the University of Birmingham. I think that was a real rewarding thing for me to do. And it happened quite naturally and organically. So I just thought I'll share that anyway.
Thank you, Dan, and good to hear that you're thinking of kind of taking it further in different ways. Anybody else?
Yeah, I mean, for me, so Phil, I can't remember his surname. He's a nurse, an epilepsy nurse who works closely with Leandro's group, and he actually he looked at my videos and he wanted to sort of see what other nurses thought about the videos. So they've been to an epilepsy conference in a few places now to show nurses about talking about epilepsy, and it's been received really, really well, and that is really rewarding to me because it's, you know, they've seen that they can compare the language that I've used to the weather, and it's like a happier way of talking to people, and I wish when I'd been like that someone might have related it to me. So that's been really rewarding, and that's been really, really nice to sort of have Phil to show other nurses how these videos can be used for like other people in epilepsy. So that's like the clinical side, and then towards the arty side of things, although video is totally, as I said, totally new to me, I do want to carry on doing it a bit more, and I've joined a video group in Birmingham to sort of start a video making group for people who make art videos, and I'm going to sort of carry on with trying to do it, but and use that similarity between you know, the weather and epilepsy, and how we can associate that sort of language and how we can put that barriers together of something that's an everyday thing, and relate it to people's lives who have an invisible condition. I'd like to sort of carry that on, whether it's still epilepsy or a look at other things, other hidden elements. But yeah, so it's been really rewarding in that way, that it's sort of been looked at by nurses and been accepted in that way. That's been really nice.
Thanks, Charlotte. I think Phil Tittenser, I think, is the
yeah, that's it.
all that. Alex and Christie.
Me to go. You look like you were gonna. No, that's okay. Yeah, I think in terms of the projects that I was working on, there are plans to kind of apply for additional funding and to continue developing it. I think, like I said at the beginning, it was, you know, I can't speak for the other projects, but this one felt like very much in the beginning, like it was, you know, there was an idea and then it was developing the model, so it hasn't even been kind of I guess taken to that kind of patient experience level yet. Even it's still trying to kind of work out what this kind of AI model would look like and how it might be useful. So I think there are plans to develop it, and I'd really like to be, you know, continue being involved in that as well. I think I kind of briefly touched upon these 2 kind of models that they'd developed, and they were bringing them together to sort of so these 2 different AI architectures, and yeah, how I would like to kind of develop that into a performance. I think I kind of answered this in one of the comments, but I think the book, I guess, for me was a way of kind of finding sort of stillness and trying to kind of work through what is very complex and also a lot of code and a lot of kind of subjects that I'm not familiar with, as I do all my kind of in my practice, to then be able to sort of reactivate it and kind of re-embody it and find a way to work with it through the body. I think I need to be able to understand something before I can take it to performers or whatever it might be. So yeah, I'm hoping that's the next step in the project, and this kind of working to forget kind of performance will be an output of that, hopefully. And the book and the performance will hopefully be in conversation with each other. Yeah, that's quite a common way of working for me. I have other projects where I sort of have different containers for different kind of parts of projects. So yeah, hopefully those are next steps.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Alex.
Caroline, can I just say, I wanted to just mention that I also work with 3 artists. I offer like mini commissions, like in a way of paying it forward. So they've made work and I've responded to it, with some of which we're going to show in March. And I just want to give a shout out to Dr. Sally Bailey, a painter and researcher in Birmingham, Koljit Bogle, visual artist and coding specialist psychiatrist in Southampton, and Jamie Cox, a horticulture specialist in Birmingham. And they've all really got involved in the project as well, which is quite good. And we're hoping to show maybe potentially a group show at some point later in the year. So we're quite excited. So the research has gone beyond kind of Birmingham and kind of beyond. So that was quite a big thing for the whole project as well, actually.
Thank you, Dan. And yeah, let us know when and if that happens so that we can share. And Christie, do you want to say anything in relation to that question?
Yeah, just kind of echoing a lot of what others have said, but I think it was quite a novel concept for me to be making art on mental health, which I hadn't really considered before as a subject matter rather than maybe positionality. And so I think the experience of working with a university, working with researchers in this way is sort of something which I enjoyed a lot and I want to do more of going forward. So it was a really great like grounding and like a different way of working than I normally do. And so like as an experiment on my own practice, like to then think like, oh, I'd like to do this going forward.
Thank you. There's actually a question that I might just rapidly answer actually around how you apply and find out more about the artist in residency scheme. So the way the residency works is that there's typically an annual call out for actual research project ideas first. And those need to be interdisciplinary research ideas. So it needs to be somebody from a quantitative background space, so maths, physics, computer science, those kind of skills, with somebody from a different background, with a health and medicine focus. That has to be kind of part of it. And then once those projects are selected, those will be the projects that we take forward. So typically, I mean, I don't know whether nobody's actually mentioned this, but one of the things to say is when the teams meet for the research incubator, so that 2 days, very often it's not just the researchers and the artists meeting for the first time, it's the researchers and the researchers meeting for the first time too. So the scientists that have never met each other that are going to work on a project are meeting each other for the first time too. So the first part is to select the research projects, and that is assessed through a panel. And then once those are decided, that's the point at which I can then advertise the artist in residency scheme, because we ask that applicants respond to one or more projects which sort of most interest them, and give a brief outline on why that project interests them and what they'd be interested in kind of developing. But we understand fully that actually the initial idea that you might have for a project, if you are selected and taken through to be part of the research incubator, that initial idea could actually completely change once you're in the room and you've had conversations and things. So it's really just a process of trying to match artists based on their experience and their practice with the teams that we think they would best align with, but also obviously trying to match interest too, importantly, and who we think would be able to sort of take forward the work, but understanding that we've got to be kind of flexible within that. So I think the answer is kind of watch this space as to when that next call out will be. To date, there's been no mention of dates for the next research incubator call out, so I can't provide anything currently, unfortunately. There is a very specific question aimed at Christie, which I'm going to ask you to respond to, which is about the use of organza. Is this your usual working material, and how do the qualities feed into this particular project? I'm interested in the variable of transparency and also folding, not foldingness, and how that fits in specifically within this project. Thank you. And that's from Rhiannon.
Yeah, it's I saw a question when it came in, and yeah, I've been murmurating on it since, ruminating on it since. Yeah, it's funny, like sometimes I say I'm a textile artist, but I do really often work with organza specifically. I think it's and for those who don't know, maybe I can just I have some to hand since I realized I have some under my desk here, but it's like very transparent material. It's often used for like wedding dresses, that sort of thing, or events as well. I find that in its various forms, because it can be synthetic, it can be it's a weaving process. So in the same way that like denim can be made out of multiple materials, it's not like say cotton, which is the actual material itself. It's a weaving process, organza. And I do find that I come back to it again and again for, as Rhiannon says, like this the transparency value. And the ability to kind of layer things in a different way. This process that I used on this project of layering and then stitching, I do find incredibly rich because it creates a material that is like, it is recycled. It also kind of has like an upstream and a downstream because it's me using my scraps from previous projects, which also speaks to using organza, of course. But then also it creates scraps in turn and then it constantly regenerating it. And then the more you do it, the more messy it gets and fibrous. And yeah, no, it's definitely something I'd be interested in using both in like more science collaborative prep methods, like the idea about silk potentially having good neurological repair properties, but also in other projects too for the layering and the transparency. So I hope that answers the question.
Thank you, Christie. Nisa's mentioned this has inspired her to potentially take part in a future round. So thank you everybody for helping it inspire. And Claire has asked, have you shared with the researchers and scientists, and what is their feedback and response to your work that you've been creating? So I think the answer to that is definitely yes, but it's definitely been shared with the researchers and they'd be aware. But does anybody want to speak specifically about any feedback that you've had from the research teams yourself? And before I forget, Dan, you very rightly pointed out that we should also give a shout out to our amigos, who are our patient and public involvement group who work with the SMQB. So these are members of the public and people with lived experience of different health conditions that relate to the type of research that SMQB and our collaborators work on. And we often involve them also within our research incubators and throughout projects and things. So they're also part of that research incubator process too, and they're a very important part. And yes, I wouldn't want to forget them. So thank you, Dan, for reminding me. But yes, the question was, have you shared with researchers and scientists, and what has been their feedback?
So throughout the whole of the process, we kind of have meetings, shared the work in different, like Dan said, they had a blog. I had regular meetings with Leandro and Amberly, who's another part of the project from Bristol, but she is from a different end. She's not so much looking at the data, she's looking at patient involvement as well. So there's different people in the different team kind of looking at different aspects. And with my initial idea, I didn't have much confidence in my initial idea of this project, but when I went to Leandro, he really liked it. So I was like, okay, I'll move forward with this then, because he said it gave, like me, he pointed out that it's such an everyday thing for someone to watch the weather, and that is what they want to do through the project. It's going to be such an everyday thing of someone looking at their watch and getting their daily forecast, and that similarity between, you know, the weather being an everyday thing that we do, that we sit down, and what they're trying to achieve with having a seizure forecast and getting that every day was something that was kind of a really backbone between the similarities of what they were trying to do. So it pushed me even further to carry on with it. And as I said, I've sent the project to Phil, who's a nurse as well, and he's had some excellent feedback from nurses of epilepsy as well, and that means a lot. But then also, I've, as I said, I've worked with media students. I've worked with the media production, and that's been really nice because that's sort of an area I haven't dabbled in, and those students and the media people that I work with, they hadn't really worked in science and any science related projects before, so it was really nice relating that getting them involved and getting them involved in that as well, and helping them to see that they can work with scientists through media production. So there's been a lot of things involved in that way, which has been really nice to kind of involve people outside. I even contacted a few presenters from the BBC as well, and one was really interested to kind of step in and do it in the future. She couldn't have the availability now, but that would be really nice, and she liked the feedback and she liked the similarity of bringing something medical into something that she actually did. So getting the feedback from all these different people has been really nice and valuable, and yeah, it's just been nice to know that it does hit home what I'm trying to say as well.
That's great, Charlotte. And I think it's really nice to hear actually that the media students and things that you worked with, they've not worked with scientists, and this has kind of enabled them to dabble in that. And let's watch this space. Perhaps there'll be a BBC News / seizure report soon. Anybody else wanted to talk on that question?
You going, Christie? No, you just muted.
No.
So that moment when you're waiting. I wrote some notes down. I think similar to what Charlotte had said. So we had these kind of regular check-in meetings where we shared work. We also had like a midpoint meeting as artists where we shared work back to the researchers or our teams. And we talked about it at subsequent meetings. I think what kind of came out as being the most interesting is the kind of researchers and scientists were always really interested in what we found or what I found interesting. Like kind of, I said the thing about the comments and the codes and stuff, that there was always this kind of curiosity of like, really that? But like how that's kind of, then we've had conversations about that, and it's kind of opened, you know, different sort of avenues of thinking about the work. There was a nice point for me actually. So the work had been shared throughout the project, and then they have the wrap up kind of project meeting where the principal investigators kind of share back the findings from the kind of period of the project. And Paul, who was the lead on my project, had slides from my project and his slides, and hearing him actually kind of re-articulate the project back, but through his kind of words, was so interesting for me. In that kind of sort of that formal way, we'd had informal conversations, but in that kind of that very formal space was really interesting. He'd really picked up on the scaffolding element, which I'd used kind of visually throughout the project. And I think, you know, he kind of said that he found it really insightful in terms of thinking through like the research as well. So yeah, that was like a really nice moment for me. It's always interesting to have someone else like kind of verbalize your work in their own words.
Definitely. Christie, anybody else want to say anything on that question? No worries. I'm conscious of time, so we're close to wrap up time. So let me just see, is there any other questions in the chat? Just a few nice comments really about this has been really fascinating. And Simon, hello Simon, saying great to see artists infiltrating the science community. Nice work everybody, and well done. So before we wrap up then, I guess I just want to ask a sort of final question really, which has been around, you know, what were the parallels for you between the work of scientists and the work that you do as artists? Were there parallels, or actually do you feel like there's no overlap whatsoever? I mean, I certainly don't think that's the case, but it would be really interesting to sort of hear your thoughts on that. And then any final thoughts that you want to give, because after that we'll be sort of saying goodbye to everybody. But thank you everybody who stayed with us online, and to all the artists for sharing the projects and speaking so eloquently in response to the questions.
I feel like I'm always the sort to speak. Anyone else want to go first?
I know. Do you want me to? I'll go first, and then we can sort. I was gonna say the one kind of, I guess, similarity for me has been the process element. I spoke to this earlier, but that sort of like working through and kind of not really being sure where something's going and trying to trust the process. But for me that just felt so familiar, and I think it made me feel really like at home in the project. That the sense of the unknown, but also the kind of the shared curiosity and sort of like endeavor. I think like that kind of, and you've got like something that you just want to kind of, you're trying to kind of answer or trying to kind of find out more about. I think that really stuck with me. It's been a big similarity.
Yeah, I think it's the processes really. You know, the research and putting it together. I was joining a project that has kind of been kicked off already, and it was kind of coming to a mid stage. But I think that whole involvement of other people as well is very rich in whatever you're doing, and getting people's different perspectives. And like I say, the focus group, it was good for me and Leandro to hear what all these different people were saying about epilepsy and their experiences, and I needed that in my work as much as they needed that in their project. But yeah, I think it's just kind of the link between the two and how it can be useful to each other, and how the dialogue between each other can be useful. I think that's the most valuable thing that I'll always take away from these projects is, you know, and if we can bring something valuable to the research, that's always nice. So.
Great. Christie?
No, I kind of think in a similar way, like I mentioned it before, but just the moment of interaction between the two, you know, like inside, like not that I'm a scientist, but you have the idea of like the observation principle, and like things are different under different conditions, and the fact that like we will operate differently because we're working with scientists versus, even though like multiple other types of engagement, it's a very specific group that we're working with. And I think it's yeah, it's something I really want to keep working on, like science and art as exchange, because I think people often make a distinction between them. And I really think that like if you're critical and reflective of methodology as an artist, and that is a scientific method, that is the core tenet of science is being critical of how and why, and that is the same core tenet of art practice for most people, I think, most artists. And so yeah,
I totally agree. Dan?
Yeah, I was going to say there's like disconnection and connection. Sometimes parallel lives were okay as well. But I think for me, it was also looking at certain graphs that were produced, which were really interesting, how they could be like these objects of desire. But also, I think for me, what was really connecting in terms of no lost connection was just getting to know the researchers a bit more, and then taking part in the artistic practice things, and for them having time away from their thinking and thinking outside the box is useful. And for me to look at their research and being confused, but being okay with that confusement after month 1 or 2. So I think for me, it's like Chris was saying, there's lots of methodology that can work and is similar. But it made me think about how exciting research could be. And I was thinking that this is exciting. So I've been looking at certain PhD sort of things, thinking that, oh, maybe I could do this and do that. So it's given me a lot of confidence. And what I wanted to finish by saying is, I remember coming to the exhibition you curated, Caroline, about a year ago. And I really enjoyed the exhibition, and I met a whole lot of people outside, like Tom and Ian Andrews and Vicky and Alex. And they said, oh, you should apply. And I thought, oh, yeah, I could apply. So then I just applied, and I was successful. I was really pleased and surprised. And it's been a great 6 months. In terms of the researchers, let's let you get on with it, basically. And they interact when they need to, and we catch up when we need to. So I had a really nice, fun team. So I was really pleased. So thank you, Caroline, as well.
No worries, Dan. So we are at time. There have been a few other sort of just nice comments, really, about people sort of saying they've enjoyed today's dialogue, and people sort of saying they're looking forward to the event in March. So just as a reminder then, that event is taking place on Friday, March 7th at Digbeth in Centrala, and you will be able to find details and things on the SMQB website, but equally, you know, feel free to reach out to me. My name's Caroline Gillett. You can find me on UAB website, and I'll be happy to share those details with you. Yeah, and just a few other sort of comments and things about how people have found it an enjoyable sort of discussion and interesting, and some individual comments on artworks and things, which I think the artists can probably read and take offline. But all that remains to be said is very big thank you to everybody who's joined us and spent your evening with us. And most of all to the 4 artists that were online today that have shared, you know, from quite personal stuff actually, through to, you know, where they're planning on going next. And I certainly look forward to seeing that and keeping tabs on you, even if in an indirect and remote way, to see what you get up to next. And thank you. It's been great to work with you. So with that said, it's time to say goodnight. So thank you, everybody. And yeah, we hope to see you at the event on March 7th. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye, everyone. Bye.
Bye.